Hello, this is Darkstalkers 3 running on a PS2. It's a PS1 game. I'm going to be very crudely counting the input delay, the frames of delay between pressing a button on this arcade stick and the character on screen throwing their light punch. In 3 Vampire or Darkstalker games. In fact, they're all ports of Vampire Savior, the third Darkstalkers, aka Vampire game. The first one, the one you're seeing here, is the PS1 version. I am running that on a PS2. That's the machine with the green power light there. It's the old boxy PS2. The input to it is being converted by a Brook Super Converter because I'm not using a PS1 stick. I'm using this Hori HRAP V 2017 edition PS3, PS4 stick, so that needs the converter to be able to use the control the PS1. The Brook Super Converters do not have any added latency that I can measure via my crude methods. The Real Arcade Pro 2017 edition is a fairly low latency stick. The PS1 version is running at 240p. On my monitor, it's actually blown up 5 times to a 1080p output that is slightly larger than what fits on screen, so that's why it looks a little zoomed in. The second version I'm going to be showing and measure and counting frames of delay in is running on this Japanese PS2. It is the Vampire Darkstalkers Collection that was released only in Japan for the PS2. It has all 5 Vampire games on it. Again, I'll be testing Vampire Savior, and the output from that, or the input, is again handled by a Brook Super Converter. The third game is on PS3. It is the collection called Darkstalkers Resurrection, and that also has a version of Vampire Savior in it. That one runs at 720p. That collection is by Iron Galaxy. Capcom did the other collections. Iron Galaxy did the famously low latency PS3 version of Third Strike, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, and I anticipate that this Darkstalkers version will be very low latency as well. All of these are outputting component video. The video comes through this maze of cables to this big black slab against the wall, which is a 4x2 component matrix switcher that lets me switch between all the inputs. There's also a Neo Geo component cables going into that. The Neo Geo, by the way, is that it's a consoleized Neo Geo MVS on top of the PS2 there. So anyway, the output from the switcher comes to this box here. This is a OSSC, an open source scan converter, and that converts the analog component video from the consoles to HDMI out, which is right there. The HDMI out goes through a little HDMI switch to my 1080p monitor. It's a 5 millisecond delay monitor, so all of this is pretty low latency. The OSSC has like 1 scan line worth of delay, they say. So anyway, fairly low latency system all around. Not as low latency as if I was outputting component directly to a CRT monitor, of course, but I don't have one of those things. So this is the best I can do on my system, and I just want to see how these stack up for the input delay for me. This is an extremely crude comparison and not something that I won't be coming up with input delay figures that you can take to the bank, and these are not extremely scientifically measured, as you will see, so don't quote me on any of this. The the numbers I will be getting after the video, because I'm actually going to take the video and just count the frames. This is a 60 frame per second video I'm recording on my cell phone, and once I'm done recording, I will just frame by frame through it and count the frames of delay between pushing a button on the stick and having the character on screen react. And so the numbers I come up with for each of the games will be in the description below the video. They will not be in the video themselves. So this is all a very crude production. I'm doing this in anticipation of yet another version of Vampire Savior coming out later this month in the Capcom Fighting Collection that's coming to current consoles. And that is a compilation by Capcom. It will have all 5 Vampire/Darkstalkers games in it, and it will probably have pretty low latency as well, but I'll have to make another video when that comes along and compare it with the numbers I come up with from these 3 earlier versions. So here we go. This is actually a versus mode in Darkstalkers 3 because the training mode in this PS1 port takes place on a blank black stage, which I thought could potentially mess with the latency. So I just put it on a regular versus 2-player mode. So I'm going to unpause. I'm just going to hammer Morrigan's light punch. And I'll be frame by framing after recording, frame by framing through this video and counting the frames between when the button is pushed down by my pen and when Morrigan's hair starts to move for the punch. You can do that yourself on YouTube if you just pause this video and press the period key on your computer keyboard if you're watching this on a computer. The period key while the video is paused will move through it frame by frame. That's a pretty boring thing to do, so I don't anticipate most of you will do that. Like I said, I will have my own count of about how many frames it tended to be in the video description below this video. Alright, so that's probably enough of the PS1. I'm going to pause the video right now. Switch the video switcher over to my PS2's output and plug my joystick into the PS2. So here we are on the Japanese PS2. You can see the output, well, if you squint your eyes at that tiny screen very carefully, I can zoom us in, you notice that the output is slightly blurry. It is running in progressive scan. You can hold X and triangle as you boot the game up on your PS2 to get the progressive scan option to come up, but there's still a blurring effect. You'll notice it's less blurry in the corners than it is in the more central area of the screen. It's weird, and there's even an additional filter option in the game that you can turn on that makes it even blurrier. Needless to say, I'm not doing that. So I'm going to do the same thing here. And this is in the game. This is in the actual training mode for Vampire Savior in the Vampire Darkstalkers Collection. Just gonna have Morrigan do her light punch, and after I finish recording, I will watch the video back and count the frames in this 60 frame per second video. Count the frames between the button being pushed down by my pen and her hair starting to animate for her light punch. Aside from the blur, this is a really excellent compilation. It's got all 5 Vampire games, and they all seem to run quite well. I've never measured the actual input delay on them, but it doesn't feel bad. There's also lots of secret menus and options you can tweak, dip switch settings in effect. Lots of extra modes, cool stuff. So I'm going to switch now to the PS3 version, so I'm going to pause and switch over. This is the training mode for Vampire Savior in the PS3 collection, Darkstalkers Resurrection, by Iron Galaxy. It's running in 720p, and again, just gonna be hitting Morrigan's light punch, and after I finish the recording, I will count the frames between the button being depressed fully and her punch animation starting to play. This is extremely crude, not to be quoted as any sort of scientific or reliable source for the input delay for these games. It's really just how they compare on my particular hardware setup, my particular controller, monitor, etc. Hopefully, when the Capcom Fighting Collection comes out, one of these input delay sites that has, super fast recording equipment with light emitting diodes rigged up to buttons so they can measure extremely precisely the delay between input and the game responding, will come up with much more reliable figures. The figures I come up with don't tend to be too far off from much more scientifically obtained figures, about a frame or so, I don't know. Anyway, that's it. So I'm just going to be counting the frames, and I will put the numbers I come up with below the video. I guess I don't have to pause that. I encourage you to check those out. I also encourage you, if you want, to pause the video, as I said, and you can advance it frame by frame with the period key on your computer keyboard and try some input delay counting yourself. Or, if you have any of these games, just make your own video and count the frames in that and see how it runs on your equipment. Again, all you really need for this extremely crude, unscientific input delay measurement method is a device capable of recording 60 frame per second video, and you probably have that in your cell phone. That's what I'm using to get this video here. Make sure you are actually getting 60 frame per second video on your device. This phone I have now, it's a Google Pixel 3a, actually has a 60 frame per second setting on its camera app, which is super handy. My previous phone did not have that, and I had to make sure the lighting was super bright in order for it to record at 60 frames per second, which was a pain. But yeah, so anyway, 60 frame per second video. Count the frames. It's pretty simple, pretty crude, but gives you a ballpark figure of how your system is handling delay. Monitors will vary very widely in terms of their delay. Large TVs tend to have larger display lags. You'll want to check the options on your TV or whatever to turn off whatever options you can find that may be adding latency, filtering options, and so forth. Anyway, I don't really know anything about that because I just use this 1080p old monitor that happened to have fairly low latency. So thanks for watching this. Again, the input delay figures I come up with for this, just for these games running on my own particular hardware, will be in the description below the video. And I do plan to do a similar video for Capcom Fighting Collection and the version of Vampire Savior in that, when that comes out later here towards the end of July. So, thank you for watching. Good night.